Welcome everyone to another episode of Chatting with the Experts. This episode is different. As you see, I have a man here, and he happens to be my son. And we're going to be talking about a topic that we discuss frequently at home, and that is rearing children as immigrant parents in the United States. And I guess it probably applies to anywhere else in the world that one may live that, of course, they didn't grow up in. So today, I will let him take the lead on this because it's something that, I say we talk about it a lot, but we're talking about it today from his perspective. So I'll let him introduce himself.
Okay, hi. So I'm Joshua Okonneh. I am, of course, the son of my mom here. So my mother is a Grenadian Nigerian immigrant, and my father was a Nigerian immigrant. And I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm 31 years old now. So in this decade of my life, this is a decade where it's more likely than any of the other decades that I will actually have a family of my own and kind of have to make some education decisions. And so as a first generation, Nigerian-American who, is a Christian, there's a lot of considerations that I have to take into account when, making those education decisions for my potential future children. So, yeah, looking forward to chatting about them with you.
All right. So, as he's told you, his dad came to this country and we weren't familiar with the educational system here. And him being the first was kind of like our guinea pig. I tell him that, all apologies, but, we kind of were learning as he learned. And so, of course, being that we were immigrants, we strive to make sure that he had the best, both him and his sister. And so we did our research and we sent them to what we consider the best schools. Educational wise, I think we made great decisions, but there were social parts of it that because we hadn't experienced that, we didn't have any living experience. And so sometimes we have conversations home about whether we made the right decisions or not, but here we have to talk about it.
Yeah, so I guess maybe the first thing I would say is for any parent who's trying to make these decisions, I think that we have to kind of understand and kind of be kind to ourselves and recognize that we're never going to make the perfect decisions, and there's a lot of unknowns. A child is not a dog or kind of just an inanimate object, so they have a soul, a mind, emotions of their own, and they don't necessarily know how they're going to react when they're put into certain situations. They're growing and figuring out the world. And so you could, think you made the best decision, and maybe it was for a time, and then it kind of changes as the child changes. And so I think that's kind of the number one thing to note, which is that, to a certain extent, it's an art, not a science.
It's an art, not a science. Definitely was an art, I would say. So, of course, kindergarten to middle school, more or less uneventful, would I say? Yeah.
So I think that those are kind of years where I think one of the things to really consider is, so for kindergarten and kind of the grade school, especially when the children are younger, there's kind of two schools of thought. So I think on the one hand, that might be a time where in some ways you want to invest a little bit, but not too much. So one of the things I've heard is that elementary school education is really what sets the foundation for children going forward. And I have seen that, where if children, we tend to think that, okay, it just matters when they're in high school, when they're preparing to really be kind of enter the workforce. But no, I would actually say in some ways, I might consider investing in a school that I really felt was going to nurture my child and really teach them really strong reading, especially reading skills, and to a certain extent, arithmetic skills. So I think that, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I do think that in terms of kind of peer pressure and social influences, that's really a time where that is much more minimized. And so that may be a time, especially if you're a Christian or have another faith, where, you kind of don't really consider that faith element as being very, very important because it's just the children are really so small.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So we mentioned that, and we said, not primary. See, that's the British side of me. Primary, elementary and middle school were uneventful. But
no, more elementary.
Elementary.
I think
okay.
I more mean up until, and even to a certain extent. So in the States, I think middle school starts at age 12, and I think by age 12, I think by age 10, children are really starting to, they're able to dress themselves and they're able to feed themselves, and they have their speaking, and their speaking skills are excellent. And so they're really able to explore, especially these days where we live in a more digitized world. And so I really think I'm talking about, up until kind of like maybe second or third grade, essentially. I think when a child is starting to be in third grade, I think that's when you kind of want to think about, okay, what are the values in the environment that my child is in, and how strong of an education are they getting? And I think those are things that you kind of have to balance. And I think one of the questions that I kind of have is, for me as a Christian, I think I'm definitely going to want to send my children to Christian school. There's a lot of influences I wouldn't want to be in my children's lives. But I think the question I have is, okay, would I homeschool, or would I send the child to a Christian school, knowing that, there's less I can control when it's out of the home, but there could be some benefit of the child being able to interact with people all day.
Yeah, because the social benefit is also a part of your development.
Yes.
And so I believe in spirit, soul, and body.
Yes.
I personally, I can only talk from what I did, in the sense of you can get the social part, I felt, well, of course, in school, and you can get the spiritual growth from church.
Mm-hmm.
Bible
study, and kids programs.
Yeah, vacation Bible school, etc. Yeah. So that is an interesting observation. But the world has changed so much between when you were in
a child.
Second grade and now. I mean, the digitalization of the world and the exposure to so much more that at our fingertips. That's worrisome to me.
It is worrisome to me too. And so I think for me, that's one of the reasons that I think that I would be much more inclined to homeschool my child. I think that, probably about 10 to 20 years ago, I personally saw homeschooling as a little unnecessary and extreme. I thought you were depriving the child of social interactions. But I think now, just with the digitalization of the world, I think I'm much more concerned about really kind of being able to shape my child's kind of like experience and their life. And, and kind of saying, okay, you know what, I know my child has social needs, but I can find a way to get my child to, interact with other children and run and play, right? But I really want to make sure that, I'm controlling kind of like what's able to go into their minds. So, yeah.
Yeah, those are formative years indeed. Okay, so let's move on to like high school.
High school, yeah.
High school for us, of course, we considered the best education that we thought you should have, and you and your sister should have. This is 2024.
Mm-hmm. What would I say?
Yeah, what would you say now?
So I think for high school, it's a very different time in the child's development. Really, you think about high schoolers, so 14 to 18, especially those latter years, 16 to 18, they're really, 18 is adults in the eyes of the law. And so 16, they're able to operate cars. They're really coming into being people in their own right who are much more self-willed and have ideas, and you can kind of talk to them more like an adult. And so I do think that's a time where really the child's input becomes very important. Hey, what do you want for your life? What are you thinking about? What are you concerned about? And so I do think that is a time where you defer more to the child a bit. I think that when it comes to high school, I think there are a few things that you as the parent want to consider. So I think the number one is really, to what extent, how concerned kind of are you about, I guess I would say like the career trajectory of your child, right? And I think that's something that's an honest conversation that everyone needs to have, right? I think that some people will say, hey, I don't need my child to have a college degree. I think that there are jobs that my child can get without a college degree, and that's not necessarily something that's very important to me, right? So, okay, that's fine. So then you will make your high school decisions accordingly. Other people may say, I really want a college degree, but I don't necessarily, I'm very open to the colleges that my child attends, or I want my child to go to like a Christian college, right? You need to make, high school decisions accordingly. And other people will say, well, I really want my child to kind of go to certain institutions. For me, my father really wanted me to go to, Harvard or other kind of Ivy League institutions that were very high in rank. And so we made high school decisions accordingly. And I think that, that is a complicating factor because, the wishes of the child I do think are important. And you as the parent you are further along and you can kind of see what the child is going to probably grow into and what they may desire, but at the same time, you also want to let them feel as if like they get to make some decisions and kind of take risks, because sometimes maybe you allow the child to go to a school for a year, and if they don't like it, sometimes you allow them to change. So I think it's just a time where you really need to kind of really be, all parents and that child need to really be in close communication.
Now, of course, we're talking some of the statements you've made, because we are immigrants, typically we come here to better our lives in quotes. And so for us, bettering our lives is always educational wise. So you mentioned the option of possibly not going to college. That's very hard for us.
It's
I mean,
very
my
hard.
generation.
It is very, very hard, I think, for. Sorry, did I cut you off?
No, you didn't.
I think it's very, very hard for a lot of my mom's generation, and even I think my generation, right? But I do think that right now in the United States, one of the big things I think about a lot is student debt has just become such a drain on a lot of young people's lives. And I think for a lot of parents, they want to be able to pay for their children's education, but sometimes they're just not able to. And so I do think one of the things that I'm increasingly concerned about is this idea of going to college just for the sake of going to college. And you go to a college where, maybe the child's not that motivated, or they're studying something that doesn't have super high paying opportunities when they graduate. And yet, they're taking on large amounts of debt that are really gonna limit them in their life. And so I think that, we as immigrants and, first generation people, Americans, or Canadians, Britons, we really have to think, like, is it possible for my child to, not get a college degree and be, successful? And I mean, I've been continuing to see more and more people who have opted for that route, and they've had very successful, fulfilled lives. And it makes me ask myself, well, maybe that's something I should consider for my children.
Food for thought.
Food for thought.
But the world has changed. I mean, there are a lot more career opportunities now that really may not be. A college degree may not be necessary. Yeah. Ultimately, it depends on the child, and more I see courses that are being geared towards the child's interest, as opposed to in my generation, it was like, you've got to make a living with this. Because remember, we came here to better our lives. And many of us had other responsibilities apart from our children. We also had extended families that we had to look into how to support. And so it was careers sometimes that we didn't particularly like, but because it was the most worthwhile thing, it was something that we knew that, would be able to help us support ourselves and others.
And I actually am 100% in agreement with that. And I think that's quite compatible with my suggestion to, consider not doing college, because I think really having a focus on and really instilling in your child that you need to be able to put food on the table consistently and have stable employment, And so if that means becoming an electrician or becoming a plumber, right? Like, maybe that is going to be give you more stable employment. Maybe that is going to lead you to being able to, pay your bills more consistently. And also, potentially, maybe that's something you do for the first 4 years of your life. For the first 4 years, you save money, you get into a position where you feel like, education is something I want to pursue. And then you pursue an advanced degree, right? I think, even going into the military, there's so many options, I think, that need to be considered. I simply think that, really having a very sober view of, if I do this path, there's going to be a lot of days that are challenging, there's going to be a lot of days that are mundane, and I'm going to need to be able to put food on the table at the end of the day. And, for a lot of people, that is college. I mean, that's my personal belief. But it is something that everyone has to consider.
You're right. So there's something that we talked about, boarding school. Immigrant parents have a culture, I can talk from the Nigerian perspective, where boarding school was culture. I didn't go to boarding school, my sister did. I didn't go to boarding school in Nigeria. And my husband went to boarding school in Nigeria for a period of time, but he thought it was very wise for you to go to boarding school. What would you say about that?
What would I say? Yeah, so I think, for me, I think boarding school was, for me, in some ways, very beneficial, I think, academically, and I think to a certain extent professionally. So for me, I think boarding school really taught me how to really study independently, which is a hallmark of college. You get to college and the professor teaches a lot, but really to excel, you need to be self-driven. You need to be able to organize your time and to know that no one's looking over your shoulder, and to, prioritize going to certain lectures or recitation or finding the professor. You need to be a self-starter when you get to college. And you need to have those strong critical thinking, math, and reading skills in order to be successful and in those environments. And so I do think that for some children, you do need to, that is something that's very important. I think for me as a child who was a little sheltered, I think it was a good decision by my father to kind of get me exposed more into the world and now I think I have skills that I really may not have had. I have really strong Spanish and Portuguese skills that came from, boarding school. I have, really strong, been able to develop a really strong career. But I would also say that I see a lot of friends who went to public school or who went to day private schools who have even stronger skills in those areas. And so I really think that it's very dependent on the child. And I simply think that everyone needs to, again, have that conversation with themselves and be willing to take risks. Like maybe I went to boarding school and I almost came back from boarding school. And so if I had come back, it could have been a thing where I tried it and it wasn't for me and, that's it.
Yeah, because I know that's a question sometimes you ask. Would my life have been different if I had not continued at boarding school or if I had just remained as a day student school that you attended?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
can't say.
You can't say. And so I think that ultimately, for me, as a Christian, I think that one of the benefits to having your child close at home is that they can really develop that relationship with you and, grow spiritually. They can be connected to your church. And, that's a really big benefit for them before they kind of go off to college. If they're moving far away, they really have that time to really establish themselves as people with you living in your house before they make that jump and go. For me, I was studying in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, and my family was living in Charlotte. So if I had gone from Charlotte to Philadelphia, I think that would have been a big jump. But I do think for me, going from Charlotte to Boston to New Hampshire for 3 years and then going to Philadelphia, well, wow, that was even easier for me.
It certainly was. I remember some of your friends that were homesick and you were like, homesick? It's nothing to be homesick here.
Yeah.
So much. It was like you were like, the food is great, I'm in the city, the school is what, I'm doing everything that I wanted. So for you,
it was so much better. I think for me, and I think that this is just a biblical or life principle, which is that when you've had adversity, when, more softer, comfortable times come, you really appreciate those comfortable times. And so for me, being able to be at school where there weren't so many rules and when the food was so much better, I was so happy. And I don't think that was the case for other people, but there were also a lot of other people who found it pretty easy to adjust, So I think it really, really does depend on your child. And, sometimes they say boys are different from girls. I think that can be true, but I think, ultimately it's really the different individuals.
Different individual. So to summarize it, what would you say now to immigrant parents? My generation is, you guys are older, but someone who is immigrating from some other part of the world coming to, in this case, probably the United States or anywhere else that is foreign to them, what would you say? What would your number one advice be to them today, 2024?
I think my number one advice would really be to kind of get out there and explore. We have an expression in the States, pound the pavement, which is get out there, talk to people, knock on doors. And so, especially as an immigrant who's coming into the States, you want to kind of collect a wide array of information so that you and your spouse, you and your trusted family members can really make that decision of what is best for my child. And I think being open to different perspectives, one of the things I think that we have to remember is that as immigrants, we're still, maybe not we, but, we, even as an immigrant, you have all the internet available to you and you're more than just, a product of kind of where you grew up. And so you're able to take on new forms of thought. You're able to kind of consider new perspectives, even if, you're kind of under the stress of how do I adapt into this new place? You don't have to kind of take all of the mindsets from where you were coming from. And you also don't have to adapt all of the mindsets from where you're coming to. You can blend and you can take from other places. And so I think that really being okay with stepping outside of the box and saying, I know that my tradition says this, I know that the tradition here says this, however, I believe that X or Y different thing is going to be best for my child.
I love that. And as you mentioned, the internet is so much more accessible now than it was 30-something years ago. So, there's so much information, there are groups you can become part of, and now with AI, I heard that Reddit is now gonna join with open
AI, wow.
yeah, and so I mean,
Sky's the
rooms,
limit.
yes, there's
The
so
sky
much
is
you
the
can
limit.
find out from others who are in similar situations to you. So, as Joshua said, the sky is the limit.
Sky's the limit.
So thank you so much everyone for tuning in today. It's always great to have different perspectives, and sometimes this perspective is from a different gender and younger generation, as has been the case today. Thank you, Joshua, for being a guest on your mom show, Chatting with the Experts.
Thank you for having me.
Before I leave, before you leave, I always ask my guests where they can be found online. Are you on LinkedIn?
I am on LinkedIn. Yes, so Joshua Okonneh.
On LinkedIn. Thank you. And for me, if you'd like to be a guest on the show, please reach out to me on my website, which is chattingwiththeexperts.com. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle there is @chat_experts_podcast. I'm on LinkedIn. How could I forget that? Just look for Paula Okonneh on LinkedIn. And I'm gradually, and I need to stop saying gradually, I am on Facebook. Just look for Paula Okonneh on Facebook. Thank you again, and see you next week on another episode of Chatting with the Experts. Bye.
Bye.